Welcome back to the deep dive. We're plunging into the stack of sources you shared with us. A really fascinating mix, articles, personal thoughts, all about a relationship style that gets a lot of talk, the open relationship.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that sparks discussion.
So our mission today is to really dig into what this material says. What are open relationships according to these sources? Why do people explore them?
And the challenges too, right? The benefits, the difficulty.
Exactly. And crucially, what lessons people actually learned from experiencing them. Let's get into it.
What's interesting right off the bat is how the sources show open relationship isn't just one simple label. There are nuances from the very start.
Absolutely. So let's start with the absolute basics from this material. How is it described? What's the core definition we're working with here?
Fundamentally, the sources describe it as, well, a relationship involving more than two people.
Okay.
But the absolutely critical piece, the non-negotiable element that just shines through, is the need for explicit consent from everyone involved.
Right. So it's not sneaking around. It's built on agreement.
Precisely. That's the bedrock distinction from, say, cheating.
And that consent piece, it seems key to everything else. And the notes you sent mentioned it's not just about physical stuff.
Exactly. It can involve connections with others outside that primary partnership that are emotional or sexual, or sometimes, both.
Mm.
And there was an interesting point in the material you shared that kind of pushed back against the common idea of a main partner and then side partners.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that. How did they frame it instead?
Well, it emphasized more the idea of just building relationships
Hmm.
with multiple people, period, based on that mutual agreement and ethical engagement.
Rather than a hierarchy.
Yeah, rather than necessarily creating a ranking that might devalue other connections, it suggests the whole structure can look very different depending on what everyone agrees to.
That adds a layer I hadn't fully considered. It makes sense. And it seems like this whole concept really entered the mainstream, around 2009? Is that right?
Yes, one source pointed out that when Facebook added open relationship as a status option, that was a moment. It caused a big jump in public awareness, online searches.
Suddenly it was a term people saw regularly.
Exactly. Brought it into everyday language for a lot of folks in a new way.
Okay, so we've got this picture. A relationship, consensual connections with others involved. Why? Why would people even consider going down this road? What motivations came up in the sources?
Several compelling reasons popped up. One, particularly mentioned for younger people maybe, is just initial uncertainty. In a new relationship, feeling hesitant to commit fully.
Like wanting to explore options before locking things down.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
A desire to explore other possibilities before, closing the deal, especially when you're young.
Okay, that's one reason. What else?
A really significant driver, highlighted quite a bit, is about addressing fundamentally different needs or desires within a partnership, especially around sexual compatibility.
Ah,
Your notes included that pretty poignant example, didn't they? About the couple with really different sexual needs. One needing intense experiences, the other preferring something much gentler.
right, I remember that. And the difficulty of making that work long term in a traditional setup.
Exactly. It really makes you think, how hard is it to expect one person to meet every single need forever?
It does raise that question.
So can an open structure maybe offer a way to meet those other needs while keeping a core connection you really value? That's the idea explored.
Mm-hmm.
The sources also mentioned it coming up in long-term relationships sometimes. Maybe things feel a bit stagnant, more like roommates or best friends than lovers.
Right, losing the spark.
Or specific issues crop up that one partner feels the other just can't meet. It's looked at as a way to potentially bring back some spice or have a new kind of experience, maybe even explore that together initially.
So it's often framed as a potential way forward, a way to explore outside connections, always based on that mutual agreement, to maybe maintain or revitalize a core relationship that isn't quite meeting certain needs anymore.
Yes, exactly. It's presented as an attempt, anyway, to navigate these really complex human desires and relationship dynamics without automatically ending that primary bond.
Okay, so if those are some of the reasons people think about this path, how do these things typically get started according to the sources? How does it actually begin?
Well, the material you sent described basically two main ways. Sometimes it's something that's discussed and agreed on before the relationship even officially kicks off.
So it's like part of the deal from day one.
Pretty much,
Okay.
yeah. Setting the terms up front. Other times, though, it's a conversation that comes up during an established relationship.
When things change or new feelings arise.
Exactly. as issues or needs pop up that the partners feel they need to address somehow. But, and this was stressed again and again, regardless of when it starts.
Let me guess. Rules and boundaries.
You got it. Establishing really clear rules, boundaries, and that mutual agreement, they aren't just nice to haves. They're the absolute necessary
The
foundation.
prerequisites.
Totally. Without that upfront transparency and consent, whatever is happening, it isn't really the kind of open relationship being described here.
Yeah.
It's something else entirely.
Okay, this leads us right into where things get, well, really interesting and potentially very complex. The sources spent a lot of time on the difficulties, the dangers. What were the big ones?
A major, major risk that came up repeatedly is just the lack of control over emotions, developing feelings.
Hmm.
The material really articulated that fear. What actually happens if you or your partner genuinely develop deep, strong feelings for someone else, someone outside that agreed-upon structure?
And your notes had that very personal story illustrating exactly that risk.
Yes, a really powerful account. One partner did catch serious romantic feelings for someone else, ended up prioritizing that new relationship, and it led directly to the breakup of the original one, for the person telling the story anyway. It just starkly shows how agreements, even clear ones, can be totally sideswiped by the reality of human emotion.
That sounds incredibly painful. And even with an agreement in place, the sources mentioned jealousy can still be a huge factor, right? It doesn't just disappear.
Oh, absolutely not. The sources talked about it feeling like a dangerous game, precisely because heartbreak isn't some abstract idea,
It's a real possibility you're accepting.
a very real risk you're potentially signing up for. There was even discussion about that tricky space of navigating honesty when feelings do develop for someone else. Like, is being truthful then about choosing the new person really just honesty? Or is it just the unavoidable truth of the pain that choice causes?
That's a deeply challenging ethical knot to untangle. And the sources also brought up external pressures, right? Societal stuff, cultural views.
Yes, particularly referencing traditional views, for instance, in places like Vietnam were mentioned. There can be really ingrained biases, especially around gender and sexuality.
Different expectations for men and women about sex and relationships.
Exactly. Different rules, different judgments about sexual experience or desires, and that can make even discussing an open relationship feel culturally unacceptable or lead people to internalize a lot of judgment, even if it feels right for them personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It adds another layer of difficulty.
definitely. And a point made very strongly to counter misunderstandings. An open relationship, as defined here, is not a justification or a loophole for cheating or for non-consensual promiscuity.
It hinges on that explicit agreement.
It absolutely requires it, that transparency we talked about. The material described using the term open relationship to cover up dishonesty as basically a misnomer or a masquerade.
Because it lacks the core ingredient, consent.
Precisely. It lacks that foundational agreement that defines genuine openness.
That feels like a really crucial clarification. It's about the integrity underneath, not just slapping a label on something. Was there also a concern raised about maybe the effort involved, that pursuing other connections might take energy away from the main relationship?
Yes, that definitely came up. The idea that the time and emotional energy needed to build and maintain connections outside the core relationship could potentially mean less investment in that original bond.
Spreading yourself too thin, potentially.
Could be. And finally, safety. Huge concern highlighted. Both emotional safety, given everything we've just discussed, heartbreak, jealousy, complexity, and of course, sexual safety.
With multiple partners involved.
Exactly. Demanding really careful attention to safe sex practices becomes paramount.
So, navigating all these challenges, all these risks, what did the sources say about how these relationships tend to end up? Or what are the big lessons learned?
The outcomes described seem to fall into broadly two camps. One possibility mentioned is that after exploring, partners actually gain a deeper appreciation for their original relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they realize its value, maybe confirm it's really where they want to be, and they become more committed. One person used that lovely phrase, coming home, to describe it.
Like they needed to look around to realize what they had.
Something like that. They ventured out, saw the landscape, and decided home was best.
Okay. And the other outcome.
The other major outcome discussed, as we saw with that earlier story, is breakup.
Right.
And in that scenario, the reflection shared was interesting. While the pain of the breakup is obviously very real, the type of pain might feel different.
How so?
It's more about grieving the end of the relationship itself, rather than feeling that specific sting of betrayal you get from dishonesty or cheating. Because in theory, Everything was agreed upon. The rules were known, even if the outcome was painful.
That's a really subtle but important distinction. The source of the hurt is different. There was also a strong personal reflection in your notes, wasn't there? Someone who, despite being open-minded, decided OIRI just wasn't for them personally.
Yes, that individual was quite clear. They said they personally value monogamy and exclusivity in their deepest romantic connections. For them, wanting to explore other relationships would actually be a sign that the current exclusive one needed to end, rather than trying to open it.
So it wasn't a judgment on others, just their own path.
Exactly. It came down to deeply understanding themselves and what they need in a partnership.
And did they offer any advice based on that reflection?
Absolutely. They really stressed the vital importance of, first, deep self-awareness,
Right.
knowing yourself. Second, really open, honest communication with your partner before any decisions are made. Third, doing your homework, researching or extensively.
Understanding what you're potentially getting into.
Right. And finally, prioritizing safety, both emotional and sexual safety. Their core point was you need to go into this with your eyes wide open to the potential pain, the risks involved, and be ready to take full responsibility for your choices and whatever consequences follow.
That theme of responsibility and self-awareness, it just keeps coming up. It seems central to navigating this.
It really does. And a broader perspective shared in the material was simply that open relationships are one option among many.
Just one possible structure.
Exactly. One choice that might suit different people with different needs, different identities. The sources weren't suggesting judgment or forbidding these choices, but rather pushing for empowering people with the knowledge to engage safely and responsibly, taking ownership of whatever path they choose.
So pulling all this together from our deep dive into these sources, what does this all mean for you, the listener?
I think the big takeaway from this material is that love and relationships are just complex, full of gray areas. There aren't simple answers, no easy fixes that work for everyone.
Yeah, it seems clear that while people absolutely have the freedom to choose their relationship style, that freedom, especially when it comes to open relationships, comes with potentially huge emotional costs. And it demands an incredibly high level of responsibility, communication, and, as you said, self-awareness.
Right. The sources kind of warn against jumping into it just because it seems trendy or like an easy option.
Yeah.
You really need to understand the potential trade-offs involved.
And they really hammered home that crucial difference, didn't they? Between a relationship based on genuine mutual consent, transparency, careful negotiation, versus one where open is maybe just a cover.
A cover for lack of commitment, or maybe just wanting promiscuity without really caring about the partner's feelings or well-being.
The sources make it so clear. It's the honesty, the agreement, the respect underneath that truly defines it, much more than the label itself.
Which, paradoxically perhaps, means it might require an even stronger foundation of trust and communication than many conventional relationships do to even work.
So we've taken a deep dive into this stack of material on open relationships. We've looked at definitions, the reasons people explore this path, the really significant challenges and potential heartache, and the lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, it's clear from the discussion in your sources that while it's a valid choice for some people, it is definitely not simple. It takes immense communication, super clear boundaries, and a really strong understanding of yourself and your partner.
It really seems like a path demanding a level of emotional maturity and, frankly, preparedness that maybe gets underestimated by people who only see the surface idea of freedom.
I think that's fair to say.
So what does this all mean then? Here's a thought to leave you with, sort of building on everything we've unpacked from the sources you shared. If navigating an open relationship successfully demands such an extraordinary level of honesty, trust, communication, and really difficult emotional negotiation just to handle the risks, like catching feelings for others, does the sheer effort required for that complex emotional balancing act, does that itself tell us something fundamental about the deep human impulse towards exclusive connection? Something to think about.